You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 16th of April 2024 on Monocle Radio.
The uses of the so-called Swiss channel in defusing the Middle East, the extraordinary yet weirdly banal spectacle of a US president in the dock, and why Georgia's parliament doesn't need a speaker but a bouncer. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Tessa Shishkovitz and Robin Brandt will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll meet the Syrian artist Issam Kurbaj as a new exhibition of his work opens in Cambridge. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Tessa Shishkovitz, UK correspondent for the Austrian magazine Falter and author of Echte Engländer, Britain and Brexit, and by Robin Brandt, former BBC China correspondent. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Tessa.
And Robin, you, first of all, this is your first time here on the Daily, and as is customary, well, one, we've made you wear the owl costume, but...
Yeah, I know, it's a tight fit, isn't it? Yeah, but the wings, there's enough space for the wings in the studio.
But you are wearing it extremely well. We do literally have an owl costume on the premises. I'll explain later. But also, as is traditional, if you could explain a bit to our listeners who you are, how you got here, and what has brought you to this, the pinnacle of your career in journalism.
Of course. Well, I'm a career journalist. Most recently, I was a foreign correspondent based in Shanghai, in China, for a period from 2016 up until 2022, which, of course, included the main bulk of Xi Jinping's second term in office.
Staying in as well.
Yeah, well, and then, of course, the pandemic and the way that China recovered from that, but then the way that the city in which I was living with 24 million other people locked down for a 3-month period. But we're here now. We're back in London, which is my home. I've been abroad and worked in Washington, D.C. and also Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia before. I've worked in political journalism here in the UK. The bulk of my career has been at the BBC, but I started my journalism at a small radio station in a commercial setup in the west of England. But now I've kind of taken my foot off the gas a little bit. I've moved on from the BBC, and now it's just a time to think about what comes next and pays the bills.
Well, what immediately comes next is the Monocle Daily, and we will be prevailing upon your expertise on China later in the show. Tessa, you are here again, despite, as I understand it, having won a life-transforming fortune on the Grand National at the weekend.
I did. I love horse betting. I don't know if I told you that before, but I do. And Kitty Slide was a horse that I bet on.
It did not win, however.
No, 5th place, but I did 2 ways. And so I walked away with £2.
£2?
Yes, I
Okay,
did.
£2. That's not quite the life-transforming sum I had advertised to our listeners there. It's a bit of a letdown.
Well, it's the beginning of a big career.
Well, okay, so you're £2 in front, and that's not enough, clearly, to spare you coming in to talk about the events of the day on the Monocle Daily. We will start in the Middle East, where it remains unclear whether or not Iran's aerial attack on Israel this weekend did as Tehran intended. On one hand, a few broken roof slates on a remote Israeli Air Force base and one badly injured Bedouin child seems a poor return for a barrage of more than 300 missiles and drones. On the other, this may have been one of those military actions undertaken out of a desire to be seen to be doing something rather than actually doing anything. Either way, a risk of miscommunication is run when Iran and Israel have no diplomatic relations, nor Iran and Israel's principal protector, the United States. So use was made, and not for the first time, of the so-called Swiss channel. Tessa, you are here at the table as the token continental European from a country adjacent to Switzerland.
And also neutral. I can talk about neutral countries, although Switzerland, of course, has a slightly different status than Austria.
Even more neutral than Austria. But basically...
Even more neutral, and also in that sense, it had a bigger role to play now, because it has a long tradition of being sort of a kind of placeholder for American relations to Iran. And it has been in this position since 1980, just after the hostage crisis in Tehran, after the Iranian Revolution. And so, again, this time it seems that there were some channels being used. I don't know if we should overplay the role that Switzerland played here or not, but I'm very happy to do so now as the representative of the neutral countries in Central Europe.
Robin, it is a strange arrangement. It does seem like something of a relic of the Cold War, sort of passing notes to each other via a Swiss char d'affaires somewhere. Is there a sense to it, though? Is it not a little bit hypocritical? If you're going to talk to people, shouldn't you just talk to them?
Well, I think let's perhaps shift our focus briefly away from Switzerland and what some may regard as a relic of the Cold War and look towards North Korea. You know, that is a very pertinent issue, certainly over the last 5 years, in terms of that country becoming nuclear armed, and Kim Jong-un's ambitions in the regions, his alliances with China, his alliances with Russia. You know, the US has no diplomatic relations with North Korea, but it is Sweden that performs the role of that we are talking about Switzerland at the moment, and does that very effectively. So, you know, the idea that this maybe is a model that is outdated and underused, I think there are many who would look towards North Korea, although we've seen plenty, of course, of face-to-face meetings under the Trump administration between the leaders of North Korea and the United States. But Sweden goes on to perform a diplomatic function there, and a diplomatic role that seems very relevant to today's modern diplomacy.
I do want to talk a bit about the attack that the Swiss may have played a role in defusing. The story seems to be that it was via Switzerland, Tessa, that the United States and Israel were informed, that's our lot, we feel like we've made our point. But do you think Iran has made whatever its point was? Because it did launch this fairly monumental barrage at Israel. It did mercifully little damage. There is some suggestion that quite a lot of what the Iranians launched didn't even get far enough to be shot down by Israel and its allies. Does this look a bit, I don't know, not that I'm trying to encourage Iran to have another go round, but this does look kind of lame, doesn't it?
Yeah, let's not talk everything, any sort of, moods up here to counter now also in the case of Israel. But it's very interesting that everyone thought that they were sort of winning this round. So Iran showed that it can reach Israel. And I spoke to a few friends in the West Bank on Sunday morning who said, they didn't want to have any damage, because it's not so clear also where you hit, actually. People are living quite tightly there between Palestinians and Israelis, and it hit the Bedouin girl in the end.
Indeed so, in the Negev desert.
It's a personal tragedy, of course. But the fact that they showed the sky over Israel full of rockets is a big show also, even if Iran took very well care of warning everyone beforehand what and where they would go with these rockets, and that they really didn't want to have any damage, because they do not want Israel to strike back at Iran, because they don't have the same defense capabilities. So this is basically, Netanyahu got a little bit what he might have sort of wanted to get back, a conversation of an alliance with the US and the Europeans. That's quite good for him, because after 6 months of Gaza war, relations with Joe Biden are at a very low point, and the American administration, but the Europeans too, the UK, they're all very, very angry. And so for Netanyahu, it's a moment where he feels he can now he can feel the warmth of international support. The Iranians have shown what they wanted to show, that they do not just have any attack of any of their diplomatic buildings anywhere gone unanswered. So we are in a situation where we can only hope now that the radical forces within the Israeli government do not push buttons to destroy nuclear facilities in Iran or anything like that, because then we're really at the brink of a big war.
Robin, the Iranians did seem quite quickly after they'd launched to call this a draw. They issued a statement saying, we now consider the matter concluded, or whatever it was. This was, of course, as Tessa had intimated, a retaliation for Israel's bombing of their embassy compound in Damascus. Do we think the Israelis are going to be content to let it drop, though? Well,
there's been a period of time, hasn't there, wherein Israel's government, Benjamin Netanyahu, and advisors around him are considering their options. The stated aim now is that there is likely to be some kind of response, and we know that the Israeli military has submitted to the government its possible contingencies or its plans for what that response could be. And now we just sit and we wait. I mean, looking back to your question to Tessa, I think there are two things that interest me. Firstly, what was the audience, the intended audience? I don't mean the target, I mean the intended audience that those in Iran's ruling regime was trying to send a message to in launching an attack on this scale. To what extent was it predominantly a domestic one? To what extent was it others in Riyadh or beyond, or others in Yemen? And also the extent to which this was a demonstration of Iran's military might, if that's the right phrase. I mean, we are led to believe that 99% of the missiles, the projectiles, didn't get through. Most were intercepted, most were shot down. But the scale of it, as Tessa had referred to, was impressive, if that's the right word. And I think that is a reminder from Iran's ruling regime to other competing governments in the region that it retains the ability to launch an attack on this kind of scale and can be an agitator, that's probably an understatement of a word, to a very significant level to its neighbours and to those beyond.
Well, to the United States now, where the first trial of former President Donald Trump is in its second day. Trump is in the dock in New York City answering 34 charges of fraud pertaining to his attempt to purchase the silence of a former paramour, the actor Stormy Daniels, star of The Witches of Brestwick, Porking with Pride 2, Trailer Trash Nurses 6 and several broadly similar productions. As the process of selecting a jury has begun, the defendant has applied for some leave from proceedings to attend the high school graduation of his son Barron, to whine at the Supreme Court about one of his other cases, and run for president. Robin, does President Trump entirely understand how being on trial works?
No, I'm not sure he does in terms of criminal proceedings. And look, I've sat in and witnessed and reported on a very long-running criminal case in the Old Bailey almost 10 years ago that lasted for 9 months with no end of defendants, most of them on bail, some of them high-profile defendants. Some were acquitted, some were convicted. But it was very, very difficult for them to get the permission of the judge to not be in attendance. Of course, their legal teams advised them that you must give consideration to the jury and what they would think about you not being there. And the reality is you want to hear what a jury is hearing as well. So I sat there, and for 9-10 months, most of those defendants were there day in, day out. But of course, it suits Donald Trump, doesn't it, to try and rile the judge, to try and rise above proceeding, to try and ask for special treatment. And he must know full well, and particularly those advising him on legal proceedings like this, that his attendance is almost always required, whoever you are, whatever it is you think makes you very special. But of course, we know that in asking for it and in seeking it and expressing disappointment that he is not being granted is exactly the kind of narrative that he wants to develop as these proceedings begin and as they go on.
Tessa, yesterday 60 out of 96 potential jurors ruled themselves out, saying they would not be able to bring an objective perspective to bear on the former president. Would you want to do it?
This is why it's so difficult to find people who would say they are objective. Nobody is objective when it comes to Donald Trump. You're either for or against. And yesterday night, when you saw him being so obviously, so he looked so tired and so really unhappy about the fact that he was understanding that this can take weeks, his ordeal. But also in front of the court, did you see how few people turned up there? So it's not only the jurors.
New York's not a big market for him, in fairness.
That's true. I also had the feeling maybe people start understanding now that MAGA means not make America great again, but make America gaga again. And people deciding not to turn up. But it was, this combination of him looking so tired and unhappy, and these few people in front of the court, and that this all can go on weeks and weeks and weeks, and that they won't even easily get a jury together. If you ask anyone in America, are you very neutral when it comes to Donald Trump? It's hard to find someone, I think.
But the guiding principle when selecting a jury, certainly in this country, and I appreciate there are substantial differences, is look, set everything aside and consider the evidence before you. That's the guiding principle, isn't it? And these jury, when they get down to their 12, will hear evidence, they'll hear that evidence contested, they'll hear it challenged, they'll hear guidance from the judge, and then based on that they will reach a verdict. So, I mean, in a way, obviously 99.9% of defendants that come before courts aren't prominent politicians, aren't so controversial as the former president is, but nonetheless, the most important thing here and one of the most defining principles is consider the evidence before you, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I think Tessa's quite right in suggesting that the altogether impartial juror is going to be tough to find. Tessa, the District Attorney of New York is already asking the judge to issue Trump fines over some of his more declamatory social media posts. Do you like his chances of getting through this or any of his other trials without either perjuring himself or committing contempt of court?
Well, as we know, he's already... it's not so easy for him to pay all the bills he has to pay and all the fines he has to pay already. Yeah, so I don't know how this will continue. But he went wild on social media yesterday, claiming, for example, that the judge does not let him go to the high school thingy of his son, Baron. And that's not what happened. It's sort of all in consideration, of course. Yeah, so he lies as he lies, and I don't know how this will continue. I think they will have to really clamp down on it, take away his phones or something like that in order to make it through this trial.
Just finally, before we move off from this subject, Robin, because I suspect the trials of Donald Trump will be something of a recurring theme. We have established on this show that it is perfectly possible for a convicted felon to run for president of the United States.
Yes.
It has been done.
Yes.
Lyndon LaRouche did it, and Eugene Debs did it, both while in federal penitentiaries, actually ran for president. So that's a thing. But is the outcome of any trial, do you think, actually going to make any difference to a single voter in the United States? Or is it the case, as Tessa has suggested, that everybody in America has long since made up their mind about Donald Trump?
Well, let's look at the most recent polling and the trends that I've seen over the weekend. It's essentially a tie in terms of if Joe Biden and Donald Trump were the candidates in the US the general election, as it is formally known. Who would you vote for? It's 45 for Biden, 45 for Trump, roughly with 8% undecided. And the reason I mention that 8% is because they're the key market, of course. The swing voters, the undecideds, are the ones who are most crucial in any election. And we know there are a handful of states that remain absolutely vital to win in terms of winning that election come November. So, look, I think certainly those dyed-in-the-wool MAGA Donald Trump supporters will only be further galvanised, further enthused by the prospect of their man being further persecuted by the politicised criminal justice system in the United States. The Biden campaign has a lot to do in terms of getting the vote out to try and encourage younger voters to support a candidate who is, of course, increasingly aged, with some concerns in Democrat circles about his health as well. So there's a job to do there. There's a comms job to do as well in terms of reminding voters across the United States, if you're President Biden's campaign, how well he's done on the economy in terms of job creation and how healthy, the IMF has alluded to this again today, the US economy seems to be. But it's that 8% in the middle, isn't it? It's those undecided voters who are going to be absolutely crucial. And to answer your question in a very circuitous way, their view on these proceedings, the extent to which they think Donald Trump is being persecuted, or is this the kind of paragon of US independent criminal justice, and this is no one is above the law. It's them and their view and what they think about these proceedings that will be absolutely crucial come November.
Well, to China now, and to exciting tidings for those heartwarmingly trusting souls who take Chinese economic figures on trust. According to China's National Bureau of Statistics, the Chinese economy in Q1 of 2024 grew 5.3%, measured against this time last year. The bounce is ascribed to a surge in high-tech manufacturing, including burgeoning business in electric vehicles and 3D printing. A spokesperson for the NBS did, however, modestly observe that, quote, the foundation for economic stability and improvement is not yet solid, which translates from economist speak as keep some cash in your mattress. Prevailing, Robin, on your expertise in matters Chinese, would you bet heavily on the veracity of these numbers?
No, of course. And in my reporting from Shanghai over the years for the BBC, there was always at the beginning of my reports a huge dollop of salt. because China has a history of being opaque, a lack of transparency when it comes to reporting its national economic figures, and frankly, not many people believe them. The government is aiming for around 5% growth this year, and guess where official figures have claimed the Chinese economy has gone to over the last 20, 30 years, or bang smack where the statistician said it would go. There is much suspicion among those far better informed than I that actually China has been in a recession for various quarters over the last year, 18 months. But the government is aiming for around 5%, and that is kind of roughly ballpark where we are with these figures today. I think the most intriguing part, look, no one wants to see a collapsing Chinese economy, because whatever your politics and whatever view you might have about China's role in the world when it comes to diplomacy or politics, China remains an engine that drives economic growth across the world. It's not good for the UK, for the US, for the Austrians, for the European Union if Chinese economic demand is going through the floor. That's not healthy, particularly if you are Germany, an industrialist in Germany. But look, housing remains catastrophic in China. I think a 30% plus fall in some residential sales, and consumer sentiment is very nervous, is very cautious. And in terms of an economy that wants to shift from being led by manufacturing and public sector investment to one led by consumer and consumer demand, that's the big project for Xi Jinping. It's just not happening. Sentiment is not there, consumer demand is not there, and the collapse in elements of the residential housing market we've seen over the last 3 years has not just had an effect on the investments of tens of millions of middle-class people in China, but it's sent a wave of nervousness through the country and through its consumers as well. And that is why that high savings rate, we heard Janet Yellen talking about it last week, the Chinese tend to save about 40% of their income. That remains a key issue for domestic consumer demand. But, money going into the mattress is something that many Chinese consumers think they still have to do at such a high level, a high level way above compared to lots of other people in economies like ours here.
Tessa, prevailing on your expertise on countries adjacent to Austria, Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany was in Beijing quite recently, and on addressing their burgeoning business in electric vehicles, etc., did warn China against overproducing, dumping their merchandise on Europe and the United States, and frankly nicking everybody else's intellectual property. The question that thus arises is, the apparent success of China's high-tech sector really good news for everybody else?
Well, for one, the German Chancellor came with half of the board of Siemens to try to convince the Chinese to do some deals with them. Because, secondly, the German economy is sort of not growing at 5% or whatever, maybe invented figures we learn here, but it's more 0 point something too. So it's really a big problem for Scholz now to sell this, because it's clear that it's also it's too late to tell the Chinese not to take over the car industry of electric vehicles and all sorts of other vehicles in Europe, because sort of the German car industry is really down, was much too slow in adapting to the new reality. So there's a huge problem, and as Robin says rightly, that it's not good for Europe or for the world if China's economy is not doing as well as it did. But of course, the European economies at the moment are really in trouble also. And so this is talking to the deaf and the half impaired are talking to each other at the moment with these huge problems. And I was actually not in China recently, but in Japan. And you have a similar feeling there that, the car industry in Japan, which is was always quite healthy, they are sort of trying to now cooperate between Toyota and Nissan to come together in order to counter something against the Chinese takeover of electric vehicle markets everywhere. And so it's a very, very difficult and diverse picture that we see here today, because everyone's a little bit in trouble. And but the Chinese, of course, will in the end not suffer so much from little growth, but from little babies, so birth rate really down. And that will eventually be sort of a generational problem that the economy will have to face in about 50 years when nobody can pay the pensions for the people living now.
On that thought, just a final quick one on this, Robin, you mentioned some fairly alarming numbers pertaining to China earlier about new home sales, which, as you say, are down about 31%. But youth unemployment is still north of 20%. Does the Chinese Communist Party regard that as a potentially serious political problem for them? Because
yes.
a large cohort of bored young people tends not to go well
Yes.
for the people in charge.
A large cohort of bored, young, educated people, in particular,
Even worse.
is even more potentially problematic. And the former premier, the number 2 politician in China, Li Keqiang, who died somewhat surprisingly last year, was a man who would talk often in public about the huge increase in the number of youth unemployed and the potential that posed for China as a society, but also for China as an economy. And China's answer to that in recent months has been to change the way it collects statistics on youth unemployment. So now the number officially does not include anyone who's in full-time education. But the response to the burgeoning problem of youth unemployment, and I reported on this in the aftermath of the initial COVID outbreak back in 2020, when we had people who left the city, went back home, came back and couldn't find their jobs again. China's initial response has been to basically not talk about it and not report it. So it's to fall back onto that opaque way of dealing with, these kind of structural problems within the economy. And look, that's not good for anyone, obviously. But yeah, large numbers of unemployed, unemployable and educated people, clearly for a government and a communist party that in the past has had very troubled relationships with young, educated people, that has the potential to be hugely problematic.
Well, to Georgia now, and whatever other complaints the citizens thereof may reasonably have about their elected representatives, a lack of passion cannot be among them. Georgia is a serial contributor to the genre of parliamentary pugilism and made another splendid contribution to the pantheon during a debate over a controversial Putin-style bill which would require some NGOs to register formally as foreign agents. As government MP Mamuka Mdinaradze spoke in favour of the motion, opposition MP Aleko Elasashvili took issue. Further hijinks ensued as the benches cleared. Tessa, as listeners may have detected from my tone, I am, despite myself, something of a fan of the parliamentary punch-up. I do always enjoy them. Do you approve of such behaviour? Would this go on in Vienna?
Are you serious? Of course not. We're doing opera ball. People don't hardly touch when they dance. So we can't have brawls in parliament publicly like this. But this was quite a serious incident because the way how Elisashvili jumped on his opponent looked more as if he had stolen his wife or his mistress than if he was introducing a Russian-style law on foreign agents. I mean, I thought the emotion was pretty serious.
I am, as I was saying, Robin, a big fan. Taiwan's very...
You sound like you have a top 10.
I do. Taiwan, Ukraine, Armenia, South Korea, Peru, all repeat offenders on this. There was one, and now I'm forgetting whether it was Taiwan or South Korea. Quite recently, pig guts were thrown by one MP at another, thereby
How'd you get those in?
Well, with difficulty, but it did at least, I guess...
Lunchbox?
It gave those in the public gallery the chance to see laws and sausages being made at the same time.
Is this, to be a little bit more kind of thoughtful about it for just a brief second, is this, an illustration of an intense and an intolerable sense that the legislative process just isn't producing what these people want? Or is it purely performative for the cameras? Or what is it?
I think they're very keen on being talked about on current affairs programmes such as this one. I think an amount of it is performative. Amazingly, given the robust level of debate that often occurs in the Australian House of Representatives, there's very little record of Australian politicians actually going at each other.
Yeah, I mean, and of course in the UK Parliament there are some things that you just can't say in terms of keeping the proceedings civil, let alone reach out and have kind of physical contact with someone. So yeah, very different world.
My particular favourite, Tessa, I think, is probably the Jordanian MP Talal al-Sharif, who fired an AK-47 at an opponent in Parliament in 2013. Missed him, I hasten to stress, so we're allowed to laugh at it.
Yeah, you see, we're in a world now where parliament brawls are not the worst thing that happens. Remember Saddam Hussein shooting his ministers on the cabinet table? And so let's see how we continue now in contemporary politics.
We should probably address the actual issue at hand just briefly before we go, which is this strange law that is being floated by the Georgian Parliament, and it does seem counterintuitive, in fact is explicitly counterintuitive, Robin, to Georgia's declared ambitions of joining the EU, because the EU has been very clear that, well, you can't do both.
No, I mean, look, there are countries. The UK is considering a new law in terms of forcing people coming to this country who I don't think specifically about funding, but about declaring themselves as foreign agents. But if Georgia has a genuine desire to continue on its journey to the European Union, this kind of legislation is just it's an affront, isn't it?
They have a very large, they're very close to Russia, and it's very difficult for them to now deal with also a lot of discontent in the Georgian population, because there's a lot of Russian refugees who chose to come to beautiful Tbilisi and they might have to stay there for years because they have no other place to go. So it's quite difficult for anyone to govern there. I mean, I'm very sad to see that they are still trying to get this law through Parliament. But the situation is a lot harder than the situation would be in Europe. Now we are a little bit further away from the scene of direct Russian influence.
On that conundrum, Tessa Shishkovitz and Robin Brandt, thank you both for joining us. And finally, on today's show, what role does art serve during time of war? And more specifically, what role does the artist serve during an ongoing conflict? The Syrian artist Issam Koubaj last visited his home country in 2007. Since the Syrian uprising in 2011, he has made it his life's work to record events in Syria from a distance, engaging in a multifaceted daily practice which incorporates found objects and materials that are gathered and given new purpose. Since 1990, Issam has lived and worked in Cambridge, where he has been artist in residence, a Byfellow and lecturer in art at Christ's College, and Cambridge Gallery Kettle's Yard is presenting his largest solo exhibition to date, Urgent Archive. Monocle Radio's Tamsin Howard went along to find out more.
As you enter the gallery, the first thing you see actually is a window painted in blue, in indigo. And this is a memory of my childhood. I used to dip my hands with indigo liquid and paint the windows as a blue blackout so Israeli airplanes will not find us.
Syrian artist Issam Koubaj remembers the Six-Day War of 1967 vividly. He was born in southwestern Syria, close to the border with Jordan and Palestine. Each time an aeroplane passed overhead, the roof of his family's home would shake and shower them with earth. This early childhood memory informs his work, titled Abundant, Not Abandoned.
So this is where I am using indigo again here, and this is a map of the dead cities in Syria. We have an area in the northwest of Syria called the Forgotten Cities or the Dead Cities. So I am painting them with indigo pigment and stones, and this is where many people now are emigrating to live in the ruins of this city because they don't have any other places. So I thought I would like to bring the news, if you like, in a different kind of articulation, using soap, using indigo.
Strewn across the floor, this work bleeds out of a construction of Aleppo before the earthquake, sculpted from Aleppo's soap. The message, he tells me, don't wash your hands.
There is a theme, if you like, that is with the curator's design, that is, this room is, you go anti-clockwise, and this one is clockwise, because we really wanted to create this infinite, ongoing crisis around the world. It's called Urgent Archive, the idea of urgency to bring the news to the gallery.
1 year on from the Turkey-Syria earthquake and 13 years after the Syrian civil war, more than 14 million refugees have been forced to flee their homes in search of safety. Since 2011, Corbage has been recording the conflict from his studio in Cambridge and these cycles of destruction, memory and renewal. The title of the first room of his exhibition, Urgent Archive. As we tour clockwise around the room, we reach 2 found pianola scrolls, saturated with Arabic writing in red ink, documenting the names of thousands of Syrian women.
This is actually a pianola scroll, and this is a technology that it's already gone and silenced, exactly like these women. And what I have done, I have written the names of many, many women disappeared, killed, and this is what it's called, killed, disappeared, and missing. But equally, what I have done next door to it, I am actually reciting the names of these people. So I'm not making them silenced names. So this is what you hear.
11:15, Budur al-Ali, Damascus, 09, 11:15, Hind Ahmed Hindi, Damascus, 08, 11:15, Mirna Iyad Khalil, Homs, 08, 11:15, Malak Hamandoush, Damascus, 07, 08, 11:15.
Grains of Syrian wheat are a common motif that appear in his work, and on the farthest wall, 3 are photographed under a microscope, enlarged and displayed, illuminated by light boxes.
So I thought I would like to reflect this idea of destruction through seeds. And as you see, actually, the skin of the wheat, it is burnt, but it equally reflects the human skin. You could see the human skin is very present. Actually, in Arabic, the word hinta and hinti, which means the color of your skin, is the same word. Hinta is wheat, and hinti, it means the color of wheat as a skin. But of course, the title of them is very powerful. It is a fragment of a poetry. If I come close to it, you will see it is a Palestinian poet. This piece is called, "Is it from a grain of wheat that the dawn of life bursts out, and also the dawn of war?" So you could see the idea that is actually civilization started with wheat, but it's actually the destruction of civilization is also to do with the lack of wheat and the lack of food.
In 2015, the International Centre for Agricultural Research in Dry Areas, known as ICARDA, had a seed bank in Aleppo which was destroyed. Natural resources are often used as a strategic tool of war, and for Corbage, the seed as an archive articulates the struggle and traumas experienced by Syrians. But from destruction and memory comes renewal, resistance and growth.
Before you leave this gallery, you will see 3 monitors describing the private life of a seed, and it is called Despite the Fall. I am watching these seeds for 2 weeks, and you could see that they are shooting and they are rooting in the same time. One of them is going forward, one of them is going backwards. So it is life and death is part of the same coin.
I asked Issam why he feels it's important to memorialise the loss and destruction, actively document the ongoing conflict, and retain hope for a better future.
I have no choice. You see, when you watch destruction from distance, you have 2 feelings, feeling of guilt and equally feeling of being powerless as a human being. But I am equally an artist, and this is my tools. This is the way I could actually work with people. If you are hearing actually in the background, this is a performance that contains both destruction and hope. And just to say it in a very small, in few words, that performance dealing with, I burnt an artwork that I have reformed life, and then from the ash I built a brick. I cannot just carry on mourning without being, if you like, I don't like the word activist. I don't like this name at all. I found it is not what I do. I feel my job is actually to respond, to reflect, to put something on the table for my visitors to make their mind, to see. I mean, look what we are hearing now of this, what is happening of the children of Gaza, and how many things are happening around the world to prevent them from just having their childhood. So this is what I do as an artist. I take the news to my studio, and it's not fun, but I have to do it.
That was the Syrian artist Issam Korbaj speaking to Monocle Radio's Tamsin Howard. Issam's solo exhibition Urgent Archive is on until May 26th at Kettle's Yard in Cambridge. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Tessa Shishkovitz and Robin Brandt. Today's show was produced by Tom Webb and researched by George Ruskin. Our sound engineer was Tamsin Howard. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.